If you like this video, consider supporting the channel on Patreon, link in the description below.
Hi-Fi Rush goes hard. No, seriously, it really fucking does. It 100% lives up to the hype. If you haven't played 2023's out of nowhere hit, then you owe it to yourself to do that. And before somebody says it, I will. It's only on Xbox and PC, and if this isn't a motivator for you all to adopt PC gaming into your lives like I believe you should, I don't know what else will, because this game kicks ass. On January 25th, 2023, this game was announced and then released worldwide the very same day. It just came into our lives out of nowhere with no previous announcements and no build up before release, and yet it did so well that it outsold Square's big budget full price AAA title Forspoken on Steam. Forspoken? More like forgotten. All joking aside, and this is 100% a personal thing, but Forspoken never really grabbed me. So I'm glad Hi-Fi Rush was the game that took off and got popular out of the two of them. Forspoken just looked lame to me, to be completely honest, with its combat looking pretty unresponsive, and it seemed to share a lot of the same issues I had with Final Fantasy XV's combat, but only worse. To be fair though, neither have it nearly as bad as Hogwarts Legacy. Meanwhile, Hi-Fi Rush is taking cues from games like Devil May Cry, which I'm clearly a big fan of if you couldn't tell. In a lot of ways, Hi-Fi Rush goes against the grain to create a very unique game in terms of release, more so than your quote-unquote high-profile releases. It had no hype cycle, and it just released immediately, and yet it still did exceptionally well thanks to good word of mouth and also genuinely catching people's attention just by being standout and unique. It helps that this game was, you know, actually good and was at an affordable price at only about $30, especially when compared to a lot of lackluster AAA titles that cost $60 to $70 instead. Hell, Hi-Fi Rush is actually on Game Pass on Xbox, so you can actually just play it for like $1 if you have that. The game was actually shown off initially at some big direct style presentation, but it's pretty easy to forget that fact since it's literally the only game from that presentation that people are still talking about, and it's been months. And that gets into my next point. The game stands out for people, and that's a beautiful thing. It's got a gorgeous cel-shaded visual style, easily my favorite game in terms of visuals to come out in the last few years, alongside Neo The World Is With You. I really wish there were more games that took advantage of modern gaming technology to push stylization forward. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, nor am I saying that I'm against super realistic, I can see all their pores approach to graphics either, but so many games nowadays do that style. So when a game comes along looking both like this and taking full advantage of modern technology and big budgets, it's bound to catch the attention of the people and stick in your mind longer. Stylized Station has an amazing video on their channel going into the more technical aspects of the game's visuals, and I heavily suggest watching that when you get done with this video if you're interested in the more technical side of the graphics. It helps that Hi-Fi Rush absolutely nails the cel-shaded style that it's going for. Truly nailing its presentation. Its beauty goes past just the graphics too, because the character designs are all so good. Everyone is stylish, and they all stand out in their own ways. Funny thing to mention, the four main characters, Chai, Peppermint, Macaron, and Corsica, have their default primary colors be yellow, blue, green, and red, which, for those of you who may not know, are the colors of the main four face buttons on an Xbox controller. I don't know, I just thought that was neat. These designs are great, allowing each character to stand out on their own and telling us immediately a little bit about our heroes as well as our villains character-wise through their designs. I don't believe the silhouette test is the end-all be-all of character design at all, but I do think it's worth pointing out how this game's cast, both within the main cast and the main villain cast, all have striking, unique silhouettes, which means you could recognize any of them if you just took their designs and made them black silhouettes. Hell, you could actually do that with a lot of the robot enemy designs as well. The animations on the characters are also really bouncy and lively, so everything feels energetic, and the game's UI feels like such a perfect fit for this game too. It reminds me a lot of older game UI, like from the 2000s, back before everyone decided minimalism was the way to go, even though it's not. The way everything in the game syncs to the beat of the music is also just so satisfying, and is the cherry on top of the sundae that is this game's presentation. Also, while I'm lauding this game with compliments, I would like to note that when this game launched, it was in a stable state. I know it shouldn't be said, and I really shouldn't be applauding a game for doing something that should be commonplace, but if you remember Mistress's Guardians of the Galaxy video, you might remember that game being in a less than stable state at launch. So yeah, I think it's worth giving Hi-Fi Rush props for remembering that a game shouldn't launch in a broken state. The game is an action title similar to the likes of Devil May Cry and Bayonetta. As such, it comes with all the expected features that we've come to establish with this subgenre, including style rankings in the corner during combat. But the style is not judging you solely on how fast you can finish enemies, but also how on beat you are. Which gets into the game's second half, the fact that it's also a rhythm game. So like I said, everything in the game syncs to the beat of the music, and that includes enemies, so keeping on beat is how you do your best. Don't worry if you ain't got rhythm though, because you can turn on Rhythm Assist, which adds a metronome to the bottom of the screen to help you keep track of the beat visually. And since it's a simple button press that can be done in gameplay, you can turn it on and off without even skipping a beat. I didn't really see a point in having it on personally, because honestly, I found it more distracting than helpful, but it's there if you want it, and I know some people like having it. The rhythm aspect of the game makes it so exciting for me because, as you may or may not know, I'm very experienced when it comes to action games. But I'm not super great at rhythm games due to my lack of experience in that genre. And this game, blending both of these genres together, kinda made for an interesting learning experience for me. It has been ages since I truly struggled with an action game, having to learn it deeply to improve and get better, as usually these games come naturally to me, and I gotta admit, the thrill that came from that experience was terrific. It's kind of why I initially got hooked on Neon White too, because that game's cycle of trial and error, perfecting one's skill at the game until you make it to the end, and perfecting your runs was just so addicting, and Hi-Fi Rush checks off very similar boxes for me in its early hours. However, once I became more in tune with the game, the fun then shifted into getting intimate with the game's greater systems and playing around with Chai's toolkit and the mechanics. I love playing this game. It is a fantastic experience, and it makes me hopeful more people will try to blend this style of action gameplay with other genres so that we can see more unique takes on this style of game. Action games have been around as far as I can remember, but this specific subgenre that started with Devil May Cry, you could technically argue it started with Sword of the Berserk, but we're not getting into that right now, has been around for about over 20 years since Devil May Cry basically invented it. And I absolutely love seeing a game like this try something completely new without sacrificing what makes the core of this type of action game so much fun to play. The rhythm aspect isn't just a gimmick, it's a core part of the experience, and it's blended in so well that it feels super natural, and I cannot imagine the game being the same without it. Early in the game, I struggled with parries despite being a seasoned Royal Guard user because of the musical timing, but now, I can nail parries pretty consistently because I've gotten in tune with this game's song and dance, and I love that fact about it. I adore feeling like I'm genuinely getting better at a game, really perfecting my craft, and becoming a better player simply from learning and improving my skills at playing the game. My only issues are weird, and one of them comes with an asterisk. The first issue being the lack of a dedicated lock-on, which means you have to rely heavily on the game's automatic lock-on, which isn't perfect, but it's something you get used to, similar to DMC Devil May Cry, which is also a game that lacked a dedicated lock-on. However, DMC Devil May Cry added a lock-on in the Definitive Edition release, but that's still locked on consoles, so whatever. My other complaint, and this one doesn't come with an asterisk, is the fact that when certain enemies light you on fire, you have to shake the analog stick to break out of the stun lock, which is a mechanic I have never liked. Metal Gear Rising also pulls this shit, and I don't like it there either. Outside of those very small, minor nitpicks, this game's combat is pretty much perfect to me, and it's a fucking blast. The game does take a few interesting cues from the Devil May Cry series outside of being in the same subgenre. For example, you have these green health pickups that you can find alongside the gears in the levels. But if you pick up a health pickup and your health is already full, it instead adds to your gears. Gears are essentially currency, like the red orbs in the Devil May Cry games, which can be used to buy attacks, items, and chips. In the Devil May Cry games, picking up green orbs when your health is full adds to the red orb counter, very much in the same way. You see what I mean? That's not even mentioning the Kale statues that you can beat the shit out of for gears, reminding me of the red orb plans from the DMC. Chai's Magna Grapple also reminds me a bunch of Nero's Devil Bringer, as well as Dino's little angel whip from 2013's DMC Devil May Cry. The little animations between enemy waves also remind me of something similar from DMC as well, though the ones in Hi-Fi Rush are way more varied and lively when compared to the angsty close-ups on Dino between phases in that game. Also, the whole close-up, slow-mo thing when defeating the last enemy during one of the game's mini gauntlets also not only reminds me of something similar from DMC, but also makes me think of the slow-mo thing that happens when beating a boss in the Kingdom Hearts games, but the slow-mo in Hi-Fi Rush is more similar to DMC's variant on it. Also, weird thing, Hi-Fi Rush has you use the magnet grapple for courses where you use it to go from point to point, which reminded me of similar point-to-point courses from DMC as well. The magnet grapple in Hi-Fi Rush can also be used in combat to pull yourself to an enemy, similar to how the angel grapple is utilized in DMC. Unfortunately, there isn't an alternate mode for Chai's grapple where you can pull enemies to you, like how Dino has the devil grapple to do just that. I honestly wish that there was something like that in Hi-Fi Rush since it added another layer to the magnet grapple during combat, but it's not necessary. The game isn't ashamed of its influences, seems to embrace them considering it even adopted the style ranking during fights as well as the end of the level report cards and all that other stuff. Hell, one of the hair options for Chai in the post-game lets you give him white hair, so I feel like Devil May Cry as a whole is 100% an influence on the game and one they're proud to recognize. DMC isn't the only game series that I see clear influence or reference to within the title. After all, Mimosa's fight has a section that very much calls to mind Gitaru Man vs Space Channel 5. Even the way Mimosa and Chai are posed and moved during that section remind me of those games and their respective protagonists' own poses. But despite all these influences and whatnot, Hi-Fi Rush still manages to carve out its own identity and stand out from the crowd in the best possible way. The last bit of gameplay I should probably get into is the platforming, since it takes up the gameplay periods between combat areas. There aren't stray enemies between arenas either, so combat is broken up by these platforming sections, and I've heard some criticisms that the platforming is clunky or boxy, and honestly, I don't think the platforming's all that bad. I mean, it's not super smooth or anything, so I kind of understand where these are coming from, but I would struggle to call the platforming bad. Sure, I've experienced what I'd consider better platforming in action games like, say, Ninja Theory's DMC, which I think had fairly smooth movement, which made its platforming fun to execute overall. But Hi-Fi Rush's platforming doesn't reach the lows of something like Gungrave Gore's platforming, which is atrocious. I feel Hi-Fi Rush's platforming is fine. It's something you have to adjust to as you play, but eventually you get a feel for it, so I don't see it as a big enough deal to really complain about. I could see someone who doesn't like how it feels being a bit more bothered by it, especially since it's half of the game basically, but I think most people won't have that big of an issue with it. Hell, I know I wasn't super bothered by the platforming myself. My only gripe with the platforming is, if you miss a jump and fall into a pit, you'll respawn back where you last stood with a little bit of your health gone, which isn't something wrong with it, but it's not a design choice I particularly like. DMC also had this design choice with its platforming, and I didn't really like it there either. Now, of course, given the game's nature, I have to talk about the soundtrack. The game utilizes licensed songs like Invaders Must Die by The Prodigy, which solved a decade-long mystery of mine because I have been looking for this song since I first heard it in the trailer for the Scott Pilgrim movie. Now, licensed music in media always goes one of two ways. Either it is used effectively and properly, thus not feeling obnoxious or out of place. Sometimes it can even be used in inventive or unique ways to make it feel like a natural part of the piece. For example, the stage musical & Juliet has a soundtrack entirely made up of licensed songs, but it recontextualizes and recomposes them in a way to where they all fit together into that one narrative. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have DreamWorks' Trolls movie, a movie I do not like, by the way. In that film, the licensed songs feel haphazardly chosen, often just feeling like they were chosen because they were popular songs at the time, and not because they worked for the film or its plot. Hi-Fi Rush is absolutely in & Juliet's camp. Now, Hi-Fi Rush doesn't recompose the songs or anything, but it uses them in moments where it's fitting, so they never feel obnoxious or like they don't belong. I had only heard of 2 of these songs before playing the game, but even those songs I already knew felt natural in the places they were put in. Hell, there are songs that I didn't even immediately realize were licensed until looking at the soundtrack after the fact. I should mention this game does feature a streamer mode, where the licensed tracks are replaced with legally distinct variants. I call them legally distinct variants because the replacement songs are very similar to the songs they're replacing. Like, so similar that there's proof of instances where YouTube flags a song like Too Big to Fail for being 1 Million by 9 Inch Nails despite the fact that they are different songs. For the sake of not being slaughtered by the music copyright bots, I am not going to be playing any of the licensed tracks in this video, and will stick to the streamer mode OST for the background music. Just know, both soundtracks are pretty damn good. Also, the game is mostly original compositions, with only about 9 licensed tracks in the game's entire OST, which makes the licensed tracks feel special. I'm kinda glad they didn't overdo it with the licensed tracks, to be completely honest with you. Not that I'd be against a Guitar Hero action game, but the original OST is pretty good, and I'm glad the established songs don't completely overshadow the original score. The game's writing is something I want to touch on as well, because I think it's pretty good, but a lot of people seem to overlook it or don't really highlight it to that same extent. The comedy, in my opinion, is cleverly written and funny, helped by the fact that every VA gives a great performance for their respective characters. Robbie Daymond, as Chai for example, absolutely nails his character perfectly, and allows for his awful puns and goofy demeanor to be charming in the way that it needed to be. This is easily one of my favorite roles from Daymond now, but he's not alone in giving a wonderful performance. Gabe Kunda as Macaron is sweet and endearing. Erica Lindbeck as Peppermint not only nails her snarky but easily annoyed traits, but also delivers on the more emotional and down-to-earth moments of her character. Sunil Malhotra's Cinnamon is delightful as he does an excellent job playing the chipper robot who is always blunt in what he says, in a way that honestly never got annoying. Sarah Elmaleh as Corsica did great as the character's Scottish stylings worked well for both her badass moments and her more subdued lines as well. That's not even getting into the other characters. Special shout out to Roger Craig Smith as Kale, because this dude absolutely fucking kills it as this handsome Jack meets Pyrite type character, and I can dig it. Like with Daymond as Chai, Craig Smith as Kale is now one of my favorite roles for that specific actor. These performances, and all the ones I haven't even highlighted, do wonders for the game and really elevate the writing, which, like I said, I think is pretty good. Some people on Twitter, a site I'd stop using if it wasn't so useful for marketing, tried to claim that Hi-Fi Rush had cringy writing akin to Forspoken. If you remember my video on the Neon White demo, you'll remember this song and dance. Kinda. I'm not gonna name any names here, but if you unironically thought this game had the same writing as Forspoken, you lack media literacy of the most basic caliber, and I pray you aren't someone with a fairly large platform built on analytical content, possibly reviewing specifically movies and TV shows, because you've clearly made it clear you cannot analyze even the most obvious of things. You know, as a general statement, this isn't subtweeting anything, promise. Point is, Hi-Fi Rush's writing works not just because it feels natural for the characters and nothing ever feels out of place, but also due to the tone of the game and its world. This game is over the top and fairly cartoony. Even its visual style reads like one of those late 2000s, early 2010s CGI cartoons that took influence from anime but clearly weren't, like Stormhawks, Slugterra, Max Steel, and Galactic Football for my British audience. Compare this to Forspoken, a game that has a realistic and grounded fantasy style that takes place in a high fantasy setting where everyone is taking everything super serious, except our main lead. I don't remember who said it, but I saw this one tweet that put it in the best terms possible, which were, Scott Pilgrim would get really annoying if he was in The Witcher. I wish I had thought of that analogy myself, because it's kind of perfect, and excellently describes why so many people were put off by Forspoken's writing. Meanwhile, Hi-Fi Rush is a game where the comedy is not only cleverly written, but it's not constantly rolling its eyes at itself. Hi-Fi Rush is genuine. It's a fun game that knows who and what it is, and it doesn't think it's above it all. This kind of genuine, honest writing, where people are able to have fun with their work without sacrificing its stakes or its world, is something that I and many others can always appreciate. With that tangent out of the way, I'd like to move on because this isn't about Forspoken. I just wanted to get that off my chest because, admittedly, it's a take I kept seeing that baffled me and started to annoy me after a bit. I like how the characters all bounce off of each other fairly well. Chai and Peppermint's dynamic changes the most over the course of the game, as they go from kind of not liking each other at all, with Peppermint finding Chai annoying, and Chai finding himself losing his patience with Peppermint's attitude quite often. But then, by the end, they truly come to care about and support one another. Peppermint does still roll her eyes occasionally and groan at stuff like Chai's bad puns, but it feels more like they're friends in that regard, rather than early in game when it feels like she just can't stand him. Peppermint is in the game from basically the start, so we get the most time with her, though that doesn't mean the other characters fall behind at all, because that isn't the case. Even with the short runtime the game's story has, it found a way to make every main character feel impactful and memorable, and I genuinely love this game's entire cast, and this game does a fantastic job endearing me to all of them and their unique personalities. Corsica and Chai's interactions are Pretty neat, especially since Korsica starts out on the enemy side before having a face turn upon realizing what Spectra is and learning that Kale hid that from her. Korsica was never a bad or malicious person. She was just doing her job, but upon learning what was going down, she couldn't stay on Kale's side. That said, she still does get a fight with Chai before joining, mostly due to a fairly stubborn desire to do things her way and being annoyed at Chai's desire to try and have her do things his way. That fight is interesting because it's not a fight per se, more so you having to parry and dodge everything Korsica throws at you until she's worn out as the team doesn't want to hurt her. By the end of the game, Korsica and Chai are also friends, but it doesn't take as long as it did with Peppermint due to Korsica's only real issue with Chai being she found his attitude a tad annoying. Also, his insistence on puns befuddled her because they're all awful according to her, but they get some good mileage out of that.
You think you can strong-arm me?
Hey, you chose to fight. Wait, you like puns too?
What? No. Whatever.
Macaron never has any issues with Chai. He more so just starts out his arc unsure of himself, but wanting to incite change due to the sorry state a company he once loved and believed in has devolved to. It's why Macaron joins the team, bringing along Cinnamon, who is a robot he designed who tells the truth no matter how much it hurts. Cinnamon doesn't really have an arc per se, but he's not exactly one note either. His last big action of the game being when he throws himself into danger to help defeat Kale's giant robot.
Was I dope, Mr. Chai? That was very dope, Cinnamon. Man, he is messed up.
It's not a lot, but it's still nice to see, especially since the game did a pretty good job endearing me to Cinnamon's character. He has this gag about how his face can't emote, so he has to draw on his expressions, and the game gets some good mileage out of that joke, but it also works as an endearing trait that really humanizes him. I like how everyone in the cast has believable reasons to fight back against Whalley. Peppermint having personal baggage due to being the sister of Kale and the daughter of Roxanne who had founded the company. Korsica's previously mentioned morals, having her opposed to what Kale is doing, as well as feeling betrayed by his deception, and Macaron's motivation also not only being the fact that he's upset and dissatisfied with the current state of the company, but also due to him being replaced by the much less responsible Sanzo. Oh, and Cinnamon's helping too. Before getting on to Chai for a bit, I want to discuss the heads of Whalley because I think they're neat thematically, with each of them not only representing their own positions in the company, but also each having major flaws that make them whole as characters. Zanzo, I mentioned him a moment ago, let's use him, is a guy with a lot of ideas, but no mature understanding of concepts like proper budgeting. He's very spend happy as he crowds his part of the company with cardboard stands of himself that don't need to exist, as well as pushing shitty merch of himself that, again, doesn't need to exist. The game takes advantage of this, and you actually take him down by draining him of his budget, pushing him to do so by poking at his ego until he's completely
Defunded?
Zanzo is a clear example of someone who's got all these great ideas and believes that justifies him to do whatever he wants, without ever thinking about the practical side of things, or how what he does affects everything else around him. This is because, like everyone in Whalley, Zanzo is a very self-centered person, and is pretty up his own ass in terms of buying his own hype. Mimosa has a massive ego issue as well, somewhat like Zanzo, which might be why she's the one who informed Zanzo that he was muted in their group call after the first boss fight with Rekka. She probably has some form of understanding with him, even if they're radically different people in basically every other way. Like, honestly, that's just the vibe I get. Mimosa is in charge of marketing in the company, but she's shown to spend a lot of the marketing to boost herself up over the company as a whole. There's even a line in the game questioning if the concert that you fight her at was for the company or for her. She, like Zanzo, buys into her own hype, but instead of thinking she's a visionary with the best ideas ever, she essentially sees herself as the spotlight that everyone should be gazing at all times. Unrelated to analysis, but Mimosa is so damn hot. Like, I swear, she is so fucking hot. Holy shit! Mimosa's exceptionally glamorous attitude and showy presentation style all make for someone who knows how to catch the attention of those around her. But she's so focused on getting that attention for herself instead of doing her job properly. Hell, she's the voice on the museum speakers as you learn the warped history of Whalley. Roquefort is in charge of finances and is entirely focused on earning the company as much money as he can, regardless of the side effects or consequences that come with that profit. When fighting him, he even mentions how losing Spectra would negatively affect the bottom dollar of the company. In case you didn't realize, his moral compass was a roulette wheel. It's fitting how, after beating his boss, what actually defeats him is his own money. Not only do Chai and Corsica work together to pelt him with his own gold coins, but he's then crushed by piles and piles of the stuff. His own undoing being his greed. It's like poetry, it rhymes. Rekka is in charge of the QA department and is very bombastic, taking after the professional wrestlers that clearly inspire her. She speaks in the third person and announces everything loudly to make sure nobody can miss her. Similar to Mimosa in that way, as she's trying to get everyone's attention. But whereas Mimosa grabs attention with feminine glamour and a pop star idol persona, Rekka grabs the audience with a big and tough wrestler attitude and a booming voice. I ship it, to be honest. Hell, I'm sure Mimosa does Rekka's makeup, so they'd have to be sleeping together for their morning routines to sync like that. But now I'm just rambling, shipping. Anyway, Rekka brags about her perfect record, something Chai being a defect actively disrupts, so it's clear her only beef with Chai is that he hurts her record and not for the company's best interest. She values her perfect record in QA, not because she cares about putting out good products, no, but instead because she likes being able to wave it around like a status symbol. Hell, it's possible she even exaggerates that record, given the scoreboard after the QA 1 million fight says that the company's gone 994,543,515 days without a defect, which, given the timeline for Vandalay that we have when combined with what we know from the Warped Museum's tour later in the game, and also what we know from people like Peppermint, this is impossible, as it would imply that Vandalay has been around for 2.7 million years. Of course, being labeled a defect means Chai isn't going anywhere fast, and thus has to fight for his life with his new Gitaru Man powers. Here is when he met Peppermint, and after a bit more, Chai is essentially pulled into Peppermint's plan to overthrow Vandalay and to put a stop to their suspicious Spectra plan, which they quickly learn is a mind control device that will hack into the systems of Vandalay tech, such as Project Armstrong's arms. Just like the one that Chai acquired at the very start. You know, Chai's reason for fighting is interesting, as he's essentially dragged into it by chance. He signed up for the Project Armstrong program to get his cool robot arm. It's not said in the game, but Chai did not have a fully functional arm before acquiring his robotic limb, which is presented to us in the game by having his arm in a sling before the surgery. That sling, by the way, then gets converted into his scarf after the surgery. With this information, it can be inferred his desire for the arm is hopes that with it, he could achieve his dream of being a rock star, which is why he introduces himself as a future rock star early in the game, and also gives context to make Kale's comment about how Chai came in and used his technology and then suddenly started calling himself a rock star more biting. In the third act, upon being confronted, by the way, Kale reveals his whole reason for the mind control, i.e. the whole Project Armstrong Spectra stuff, was to urge people to buy his products. Huh. It's kind of like that one guy from that one Scooby-Doo game Mistress reviewed a while back. What was his name? Travis or something? I don't remember. Chai actually vocally calls out this plan as being corporate, which fits in with this game's very anti-corporate, pro-passion vibe. A game like this absolutely earns that kind of vibe too, because it's a labor of love and passion from the people involved, and feels so unique when compared to so many other higher profile releases of the year. Hi-Fi Rush really doesn't feel like a game from 2023. It feels like a game from the 2000s, not just the big often remembered titles like Devil May Cry or Kingdom Hearts, though it does make me think of those as well. But the games Hi-Fi Rush makes me think of more are those niche 6th gen titles that have dedicated fans but often aren't known by most people. God Hand is one I find myself thinking of a lot with Hi-Fi Rush, for example. But it doesn't feel like a copy of any of these games, and carves out its own identity and feels so its own, you know? Its tone, its visual style, how the game stands out in one's mind, and how it's built all feels like a product of the 2000s era of gaming, when you could just stumble upon a game that you had never heard of before and discover a gem. To get back on track, let's talk about Kale. He's an interesting opposite to Chai. Chai isn't all that smart, but he's a free spirit who values that freedom. Meanwhile, Kale might be intelligent, but he's very controlling. What makes the two comparable is a self-centered quality they both have. But while Chai grows during the events of the game and grows as a person, learning to put his faith in others and not to try to do everything himself, hell, we see the fruits of that pretty early on, because The game shows everyone helping Chai invade Vandalay HQ as the plot progresses. Meanwhile, the other members of Vandalay fell one by one because they were also caught up in themselves, focused very little on the main goal, and only focused on their little corner of the conflict. Kinda like Organization 13 when you think about it. Everyone being focused more on their own little world and their own problems rather than truly caring about a united main goal. Huh. Funny how that works. Kale's final boss theme is Perfect Drug by Nine Inch Nails. Of course, provided you aren't in streamer mode, but I bring this up because I think the song's use here is perfect. In context, it symbolizes a bunch of things. It symbolizes Kale's desire for control, but it can also represent how he's his own worst enemy. His body is almost entirely robotic, showing him rejecting his humanity, JoJo, and giving into technology to such a degree that he's mostly tech at this point. I look to the lyric, "I've got my heart, but my heart is no good" here. Kale's essentially given up his heart in a symbolic sense, whereas Chai has only embraced his heart. Chai's let people in, allowed them to become truly his friends, and it's that friendship that helps take down Kale, because Kale's boss fight requires the use of your teammates, and it's not the only fight like that. Mimosa's fight literally cannot be progressed without the use of summons to stun her, which the game tells you so it's not hidden and should be easy to figure out provided you're not a Twitter user. Other fights like Roquefort even include quicktime events featuring teammates like Corsica helping Chai hurl the wolf's own attacks and gold back at him. Hell, the level right before the final fight with Kale has the whole team make their way to him, all while helping Chai make it. Even all pitching into that fight with a giant robot at the end of that level. There's clear signs here that the best solution is to allow people in, to put your faith in others as they put their faith in you. Without you, everything falls apart, as the lyrics say. Kale believes nothing else matters to his success. So much so that he even disowns his sister just for disagreeing with his beliefs and brainwashes his own damn mother. Kale's lost his humanity, lost his heart. Meanwhile, Chai found his, which is why Chai goes from
Rockstar.
Future rockstar.
to
I don't need a guitar. I am a rockstar.
hell, there's even this!
We need people with influence, and you're giving me losers.
To this!
You're just a bunch of losers.
Chai's story in this game was one of growth, and figuring out he can't do everything alone. He's not the sole focus. He's not the only hero. He's not the star, so to say. Think to Chai's inner world, where he sees himself on a stage with people cheering his name as he fights. When Chai was so Chai-focused, he was only a future rock star, i.e. someone who wasn't a rock star yet. Hell, we see him cause himself more problems early on because he's so caught up in his own hype, and that does cause some friction between him and Peppermint. Cool thing there, Peppermint's strife with Chai is also partially because she's just as self-centered at first. She's so focused on her reasons for wanting to take down Kale, her desire to save her family's company from her evil brother, that she hides information from not only Chai, but the others as well. When it all comes out and she finally does reveal that Kale's her brother, she's very much expecting Chai and the others to reject her. But they don't, with Chai even saying they wouldn't be here without her. Here he is, recognizing her part in all this, and even allows her the cool hero line that he wanted to say. The Chai at the beginning of the game would never have done that. Corsica initially wanted to just handle Spectra her own way, by herself, but it was only through helping the others that she even made a dent in Kale's plans. She couldn't do it alone, even if she wanted to, and while she was initially stubborn to admit that, she eventually did join up and help. Macaron was too timid and afraid of conflict to even rise against Sanzo before meeting Chai and Peppermint. Only by meeting them did he come out of his shell and was helped to return this company that he loved back to its former glory. Hi-Fi Rush is a game about not only embracing yourself, your own unique beat, but embracing the beats of others and allowing people into your heart, because we can't do everything on our own. It might seem easier to hide our problems out of fear of burdening everyone else around us, or a fear of being rejected for daring to do more than just say yes. But it's only when we let others in, accept that love, accept that companionship, that we can truly be the rock stars we all imagine ourselves to be. It's why Kale and his crew fail. They're so focused on themselves and basically don't let anyone else in. They don't accept criticism, even if it's from each other. And that's how we systematically defeated each and every last one of them. And it's why Perfect Drug fits Kale so well. It's a song about a dude literally dying from the inside out because he keeps giving into his vice, his toxic addiction, and it's such a great way to cap off that character. Kale's defeat was one of his own making. Even literally, as it was him throwing Chai's MP3 player off the edge that allowed it to land on Chai and get implanted in his chest, which gave him those music powers in the first damn place. In every sense of the word, Kale's own actions led to his own defeat because he was so caught up in himself that he couldn't see the bigger picture. He couldn't see anything past his own little world. And as they say, the world ends with you. If you want to enjoy life, expand your world. You gotta push your horizons out as far as they'll go. That's what Chai did. It's what Peppermint did. It's what Macaron did. It's what Corsica did. Hell, it's even what Cinnamon did. 808 almost immediately welcomed Chai in, and that paid off swimmingly for everyone. And I think it's something we should all do. I felt challenged by an action game, truly challenged, something I hadn't felt in years, and it's entirely due to the unique spin this game took with its genre, a genre that I'm so familiar with. Hi-Fi Rush is a reminder of what games can be, and a reminder of why we all need to expand our horizons and explore games we've never heard of, to go past what's put right in front of us, to find new games, new experiences. And that's a reminder I feel a lot of people needed, since I'm constantly seeing people complain about how games aren't fun anymore, and how it's all just the same shit, when that's not even close to the truth. Sure, if all you ever play are the big $70 AAA releases from Sony, but that's such a narrow-minded view of the world, especially when, honestly, I'd argue now is a pretty damn good time to be a gamer. If there's a game you want to exist, something close to that idea probably exists, and if it doesn't, the resources to make that game real yourself are readily available, more so than ever. Do you want a classic-style survival horror game akin to classic Silent Hill, but feel burnt out by modern, over-the-shoulder third-person horror games? Well, Signalis exists, and it's only $20. Do you want a living Nicktoon of a game that plays like a lost Wario Land title? Pizza Tower exists, and guess what? $20! Do you want a tactical fantasy RPG a la Fire Emblem? Symphony of War, the Nephilim Saga, is out and can be bought, surprise, surprise, for $20! Do you want a shop management simulator set in a fantasy world with banger character designs? Potionomics exists, and it's for $25, actually. Want a fast-paced first-person parkour-focused shooter made for freaks with ruined vocabularies that really like Bleach? Well, that's really specific of you, but guess what? The Odd White is right there, and has been there for over a year at this point. This isn't even getting into the millions of games that release every year that are so unique, so full of love and passion, and just completely fly under the radars of the general public despite how fucking good they are. And no, this principle isn't exclusive to just indie games. Neo: The World Ends With You is legit the best game I've ever played, and a lot of people just completely missed it. Not to mention all the games that you've probably missed out on, both in terms of recent stuff and old stuff that flew under everyone's radar. Think about God Hand, an old PS2 action title that most people missed upon its release. That's most well-known trait today is that IGN gave it a really bad review that people still meme on to this day. To the people who played it, God Hand is a fantastic game people love to death, but most didn't get to play it, and a lot of people still haven't. The wild thing is it's not alone in that regard. The 6th generation alone is filled to the brim with fantastic gems that flew under the radar when they released. What I'm trying to say with all of this is if all you ever play are the biggest releases of a year, with their hyper-realistic textures and their big-budget marketing campaigns, then you miss out on so much else. Please, if you take anything from this video outside of the fact you should 100% play Hi-Fi Rush, because it is one of the best games I've ever played, please take what I'm about to say next to heart. If you think that maybe video games aren't for you anymore because it all seems so samey or whatever, then I implore you, please actually look for the games you want instead of just expecting them to be given to you on a silver platter, because most likely the games you want to be made are still being made, and some are even already out, ready for you to play, and usually at an affordable price too. You just have to actually look for them. I'm glad Hi-Fi Rush exists. I'm glad Hi-Fi Rush took the world by storm and people saw it, that people played it and people spread it, because a game like this easily could have flown under the radar like so many other passionate experiences before it. In conclusion, I love Hi-Fi Rush so fucking much. It's one of my new favorite games. It's exciting, it's thrilling, it's unique, it's stand out, it's passionate, it's liberating, it's surprisingly emotional at times. But most of all, it's a rush.
You may not be Sufleh, but you get it done.
I like this new child. He's quite come around, hasn't he?
I, for one, Mr. Jai, like your badge.
Stealing my technology and then calling yourself a rock star?
Right. I do trust you. You know that, right?
You're just a bunch of losers.
Maybe so, but together we're unstoppable. I don't need a guitar. I am a rock star.
Trip the rest.